Hello, everyone. I'm Adam Elwanger. This is episode 4 of Whither the Looniversity, where we talk about the fate of higher education and some of the problems we face in restoring it. With me today, I'm excited to have Jenna Robinson, who is president of the James G. Martin Center for Academic Renewal. They are based in Raleigh, North Carolina. Jenna has a PhD in political science from UNC Chapel Hill. She's published widely. She's published in Investors Business Daily, Human Events, Forbes, The American Thinker, lots of great sites. And in the course of our discussion today, if you get interested in the work of the Martin Center, we encourage you to check out their website and please sign up for their newsletter. They have a lot of good stuff, and every once in a while you'll find something written by yours truly there also. Jenna, welcome.
It's great to be here.
So one of the first questions that I have for you is you've spent a lot of time as a student over the years, and you did not opt for the professor route. You're doing sort of, I guess, what amounts to advocacy work. Could you tell us a little bit about the decision not to take sort of the traditional academic career path?
Right. So part of it is just my own personality and the kind of work I like to do. I don't think I have the attention span to be a faculty member. And I found that out throughout my graduate work. After I finished my master's thesis, I decided I didn't want to do any more work on that topic anymore. Picked a different topic for my dissertation. And then after I finished my dissertation, didn't ever want to see that topic again either. And I know that for a lot of faculty members, you pick a topic and you stick with it. And I think that I would be nuts by now if I had to do that.
I'm well on my way.
The quality of my work would not be high. And so that was a major driver. I also really liked public policy. As I was doing political science, the coursework I did was kind of drifting closer and closer to public policy. So it seemed like a natural fit. And I think the last reason, and here I'm going to give a little dig at academia, is that way more people read my writing.
Oh, yeah.
Doing what I'm doing now than if I were doing academic publishing.
This was something that I figured out about 5 years ago, many years ago, when I was a graduate student. I saw a major figure in my field at an academic conference, and I said, "Why don't you publish stuff anymore?" And he looked at me and he said, he was an old man, and he just said, "Nobody reads the journals." Like I had asked
Yeah.
a stupid question. And I learned very quick once I started writing for the public that if I spend a year on an academic essay and publish it, maybe I'll get 10 citations in the first 2 years or three
Right.
years. If I write something for normal people, I might get 3,000 people to read it in the course of a week.
Yeah.
It's a lot more gratifying. I think more academics should do that. Stop writing for professors and start writing for sane people. Um, so tell us a little bit about the mission of the Martin Center.
So the Martin Center's mission is to improve higher education. And the way we do that is by focusing on state policy and board governance. And so we're looking for specific things that can be changed either by boards of directors or by state legislatures to improve the universities, at which they work or in the states that they govern. And so some of what we do is aimed at private universities, but the bulk of what we do is aimed at public universities. About 80% of students go to public universities. And so it makes sense that if we're going to reform, then the biggest areas for reform are public universities. And the things that we care about are academic quality, responsible governance, academic freedom, free speech, and viewpoint diversity, cost-effective education solutions, and that means for both students and taxpayers, and innovative market-based reform. And so kind of within those buckets, we look at a lot of different things. Really, if it has to do with higher education and it can be solved by a policy change, we're interested.
And you guys, you kind of focus on North Carolina institutions, but you also sort of consider the national scene, right?
Right, absolutely. And most of that is because the problems we have here in North Carolina, the issues that go on at North Carolina universities are not unique to North Carolina. Universities across the nation have the same issues, increasing tuition, uh, falling academic standards, too few students are employed in their area that they got their major in, too few students graduate. They're not state-specific issues.
Great. So I want to talk a little bit about that question of standards more specifically. And, you guys do work to raise standards in higher education. But one thing that I think about often is that even if we could succeed in doing that, it seems that the standards have fallen so far in K through 12 education that it's almost like even if we succeeded to sort of restore some standards to the university, would we even have a sizable feed of students that could meet the expectations? And
Mhm.
so, I mean, I wonder if you could just sort of talk a little bit about that, and if we need to start, do we need to start in the K through 12, or is there a way we could do both at the same time, or what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I think it goes without saying that standards in K-12 should absolutely be addressed. It is a travesty that so many students get through, third grade, fifth grade, ninth grade, and can't read at at grade level. That's ridiculous. And that should be addressed for sure. But I think that independent of what K-12 does, universities that purport to do university level work should keep standards high. And namely, that is because university level work has an independent purpose that is unrelated to how qualified students are. The work that is done at universities, both for vocational training and for the discovery of ideas, requires a certain amount of, you know, academic oomph. People have to be prepared for that if they're going to do meaningful work at the level that we should expect for university educated people. And even if that means there are fewer students available to go directly into a 4-year school, then, so be it. Obviously, that's one of the problems, that there aren't enough people available and universities want students in the seats to pay tuition. Um, and obviously, the money is always the motivation for everything. But I think academic standards should be of paramount importance at universities that, they're claiming to do, world renowned, era changing work. And you can't do that if you're unprepared and unserious.
So one approach that I find a lot of sort of conservative minded people like myself often say is, well, we need to tighten the purse strings, that this is what legislatures need to do. And one thing that I think we're seeing in response to that, like in Texas, where I live and work, there's been a little bit of that. And I actually think that's contributed to lowering the standards, because when the universities realize, all right, we're going to have a budget shortfall, then they just say, well, we have to admit more students, and they really just don't care, the level of preparation there. And so I think as a professor, I'm faced with a very difficult task. I have few very bright students in every class. I have a few people who are, need a little bit of work. And then I have some people who probably, are not prepared for collegiate level work.
Mhm.
And it puts professors in this position where it's like, who do I pitch the course to? Do I pitch it to my 5 best students?
Mhm.
And just sort of discount everybody else? Do I pitch it at the middle and ensure that I'm still above the heads of the worst 10, but beneath what the best 10 are doing? And so I think that is that a viable option, sort of tightening the purse strings? Or should we have faith that the universities will not sort of cravenly try to make up the deficit in ways that will actually worsen the educational product?
I don't think that tightening the purse strings, by say cutting state funding is the right answer to addressing academic quality problems. I think that the answer for academic quality problems is to address academic quality, have real standards, enforce them, make them clear, and don't grant waivers or exceptions. And
So
I
it
think that,
needs to start basically with faculty and administration then.
yeah, absolutely. Um, most or boards, but
Mhm.
It has to be something that the university decides we're serious about academic standards. We do college level work here, and we're going to require that students are prepared when they come in. I think we should also, either at the state level or university levels, not be afraid to admit that different universities serve different populations. Community colleges are a great place for students who are not quite ready. They do often wonderful work to get students kind of through that transition from high school to universities, or alternately, they show students that the university sitting behind a desk your whole life doing academic work is not for you, and there's something else that's a better fit. At the same time, I think universities, four-year universities, should also maybe strive to diversify and not all of them chase R1. It makes no sense for every university to try to be an R1 university and for that to be their focus. If a university is an undergraduate institution and wants to teach undergraduates well, then put the money in that and focus on doing that job well, instead of chasing the journals or chasing big discoveries.
Would you agree that in general there are far too many people in the United States going to college?
Definitely. And when I say going to college, I definitely mean going to a four-year university. I don't mean pursuing some kind of post-secondary education, because, with as dumbed down as our high schools have gotten, it's often true that students do need to do something after high school in order to prepare themselves for the future. But I do think there are too many people getting generic majors at generic universities that they think will guarantee them a good job in something white collar. They're not sure what.
I think students are starting to catch on to that the bachelor's degree is not the promise of sort of middle class security or sort of job satisfaction, that we've produced far more credentialed people than could possibly
Right.
reap the rewards of that. And I wonder, how far off the reckoning is, like, for universities when people get hip to that.
My hope though is that the solution for those students who have cottoned on isn't to double down and go get a master's degree. I think we've probably all seen the recent data from the Wall Street Journal about master's degrees that, by and large, really don't pay off, like even more so than the bachelor's degree. And for years, I think people did go to that master's degree. If one credential isn't enough, I'll get two. So I hope that with this realization, which I think you're right, students are coming to the realization, I hope that they start looking for alternatives to a generic four-year degree rather than doubling down and doing more.
What alternatives of that sort exist right now? I mean, beyond just community college and sort of trade vocational schools, it seems like it's almost like the pressure to get gainful employment is so high that they're almost culturally, we don't have a space built in to sort of experiment with different ways to prepare oneself for making a living.
Yeah, I think in this, the tech industry is leading the way. And so there are a lot of employers in tech that now say they will hire without someone having a bachelor's degree. And so students have a lot of options of how they get prepared, because the employer is just testing their skills as they come in to see, can you do this work? I'm going to give you this test of your skills right here as part of the job application. And if you can do it, then you're in. And obviously not all professions lend themselves to that as well as tech does. But I do think that's what we can learn from, is for employers to look at people's skills and what they're bringing to the table instead of the piece of paper that they have. And I think that there are other jobs where people can easily prove that they are able to do what they say they're going to do, like photography or graphic design. Those are things that you can demonstrate very clearly, whether you have the chops to do a particular job. And so I think more jobs like that, where demonstrations of skill are simple, those are the fields where we'll see people leaving traditional higher ed. Other fields, especially fields where the state requires a license for which you have to go to college, accounting or engineering or law, medicine, people who want to go into those fields pretty much have to take the 4-year degree route. But I think that in other fields, there's going to be a lot of breaking away.
So to shift gears a little bit, there's signs that the Biden administration may try to vacate some amount of student loan debt for certain borrowers. There's some question as to whether or not he even has the authority to do this, but leaving that aside, it seems that they are not committed to addressing any of the drivers of cost, any of the things that create the massive amounts of loan debt that exist. So what's the Martin Center's take on this, on questions of sort of loan forgiveness, on how to address drivers of cost, those issues?
So the Martin Center's take on loan forgiveness is that it's a terrible idea. It's a moral hazard. For one, it's going to show students in the future that they don't have to take college debt seriously, because if they do it once, they're going to do it again. It's regressive, which I think a lot of the supporters do not admit. The major beneficiaries of any kind of student loan forgiveness, whether it's $50,000 or $10,000, are going to be people who got college degrees, who I think we all know that on average have higher incomes than people without college degrees. I think just at its base, it is unfair to forgive this one particular kind of debt without forgiving other types of debt. And as someone who's fiscally conservative, I'm not in favor of just kind of blanket forgiving debt. People, if they say they are going to pay for something, they should do so. All of that said, I do think that universities have been profligate in their spending, and they have implicitly made promises to students that they can't keep. And so I do think that we need to address those things. One way I think that a start can be made is to allow student debts to be dischargeable in bankruptcy under certain circumstances. And that would not be a wild and crazy idea, because it's how things were, 20 years ago, I think, less than 20 years ago. And it was not the case that, every graduate was rushing to the bankruptcy courts to try to get out of student loans. It was rare. And so I think that if we go back to that position, then we have addressed the most acute problems presented by student loan debt, because there are people who are really in bad situations. They can't get out from under the debt. There's nothing they can do. And so if you put those bankruptcy protections back into place, then you've addressed the acute problem of the people who really are suffering. And then, like you said, you have to address the underlying cause. My solution for that is for universities to have skin in the game. The universities should be the co-signers, underwriters, whatever you want to call it, for student debt, so that if there is a default on the debt, the university has to eat some of it. And I think that would change universities' incentives in such a significant way that it would change their behavior. And so that is my solution. It is something that has been bandied about in Congress a little bit, certainly not under this administration, but in the past, it is something that has been discussed. And I think that people should continue to push for that solution, because anything else is going to be treating the symptoms instead of treating the cause.
So it used to be that banks issued loans.
Right.
And then a few years back, it became the government who issued loans, which means that universities have no fears about them receiving the money from any admitted student. Is there a way to pry the sort of student loan industry loose from the Fed now, or is it there, and we can't restore it to the old way where
Mhm, mhm.
that money was touchable?
Right. Well, private student loans still do exist because there are caps on undergraduate federal student loans. And so they are there for that purpose. They're also there for, graduate students take out private loans. People who want to consolidate after leaving school take out private student loans. And so this is a product that still exists. And so I don't think it's hopeless. Um, but one thing, one of the reasons you can't discharge student loans in bankruptcy is because it's what the bankers wanted in exchange for making these unsecured loans. And so I don't know that banks would want to go back to the way it used to be, unless they get to keep all these protections in place where it remains guaranteed money.
Hmm.
And so I don't know that going to a private system with all of the current rules that we have would help anything.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Um, so I'll ask you the same questions I've been asking all the guests on this program. And the first one is, how did this happen? I mean, I think that the university is in such a state of disarray as an institution in American life. I have been in universities since I was 18 years old as a freshman, and lived and worked at a university ever since. And it just seems amazing to me that in the span of, say, 25 years, we've gone from the institution that we had when I started college to the one that we have now. Um, and it's difficult for me to wrap my head around the dynamics of exactly what happened. Do you have an account of it that you can give?
I can give a partial account, and I
Okay.
think that I'm gonna follow the money to tell my story, and that is the free and cheap money that was made available for students to go to college created a bunch of unintended consequences. The point of giving out federal student loans, which started in the 70s, was to make it so that students who were otherwise unable to afford to go to universities would have money available to do so. But the unintended consequences since then have been uh, just exponential. Um, the first is that universities, now knowing that this money is available, that the federal government is going to give grants and loans, have felt like they can jack up tuition without any consequences. They know that the students will still come because they're not paying for most of it themselves, or at least they're paying for it with future money. And we all know that future money is not the same as money in your pocket right now.
Very
And
dicey.
so universities just glibly raise tuition knowing that the money is there. They know that students are not going to be price sensitive anymore. And so that's part of the problem. Um, a consequence of all this tuition raising means that we're now obsessed with return on investment. And so it no longer makes economic sense for most students to go and focus on the liberal arts, to focus on truth, goodness, and beauty. They have to make sure that they're going to get a return for the money that they're putting in. And their parents are telling them, don't major in English, go get a business degree. And that probably works out for those students, but it has been, it has gutted the liberal arts, it has gutted the humanities. It means that the university isn't doing what it used to do. It's no longer dedicated to the search for truth. It is, it's a degree production machine. Um, it also means that there's all this extra demand because money's not available to become an entrepreneur, or at least cheap money isn't available. Cheap money until the Trump administration wasn't even available to go to trade schools. So if you want someone else to underwrite the next step in your journey to a career, higher education is the only thing that the government's gonna give you cheap money for. And so now we've got all this demand from students who are there for the wrong reasons. They're not interested in serious university work. They're not interested in, the life of the mind, but this is the money that's available. And we also get the new conventional wisdom telling students that if they don't go to a four-year university, they're losers. And I think that's been, hugely detrimental to a lot of students who are either unprepared or just ill-suited to the kind of work that is done getting a four-year degree. Sitting behind a desk, doing written work, doing, scholarly activities. And because all of these students are there for the wrong reasons, who are unsuited for various reasons to universities, faculty have responded. These are their customers, whether you like that word or not. And so then faculty feel like they have to dumb down their courses. They have to provide what students want. They have to focus on skills instead of ideas. And I think all of that stems from this kind of, one, the cheap money, and two, our conventional wisdom that tells people this is what you have to do.
Yeah, that's a powerful account. I will say, kids, don't become an English major. I work in an English department. And I want to talk about that a little more, because it's sort of like the idea that students have been scared off of liberal arts and things like English is absolutely true. But like at this point, like those disciplines in practice are not somewhere we would want
Right.
them to return to, um, English departments are essentially now just sort of a site for woke indoctrination. They're not,
Mhm. Like,
they're not
we
about the
to
good, the
read
beautiful, and the true.
everything through the lens of race, class, and gender. Come to the English department. We'll teach you how to be aggrieved.
That's what it is. And so in this sense, like the desire to sort of push the kids that are fleeing that ship back into it, with the thought that that they're going to get some learning about aesthetics or goodness or tradition is just gone. They're going to read The Awakening and use it for a springboard for a critique of sort of feminism, and the
Right.
patriarchy and everything else. Um, and I wonder, so talking about sort of wokeness, the culture of the academy, would you say that that too is linked to the cheap money thing, the influx in the 70s, or is that sort of a wholly different phenomena that's being driven by different factors?
I mean, I think part of it is the cheap money. If there's cheap money from a source that isn't really paying attention to what the end product looks like, then you can be free to do things that are just like weird and inconsequential and that the public hates, because the public isn't actually, like, they have no feedback mechanism. And so, yes, the fact that there's just no accountability and they have these gobs of money to do frivolous things with, sure. Um, but I think it's also that, you know, universities started out, and I think I've seen data on this, like maybe in the 50s and 60s, they were a little bit left of center. So they've always been left of center. But the very tools that we gave faculty for autonomy to preserve academic freedom, things like tenure and faculty governance, they kind of blew up. And so we ended up with faculty choosing people who are like themselves to populate the departments. And, the first generation of doing this, it wasn't so bad. The faculty got a little bit more left of center, a little bit further away from the population. But if you do this for, 70 years, you suddenly end up with faculty, or not so suddenly, but you wake up and you end up with faculty who are just totally divorced from the rest of the country, because they've just been allowed to kind of self-perpetuate their own ideas and their own proclivities in their departments.
I think sometimes that the standards have been lowered for so long that a lot of the professors, people who are professors now, are not really scholars in the old sense. Like they don't even have a mastery of of their own discipline and the way that a professor in that discipline would have had a mastery, 30 years before, or something like that. This is another excuse me, idea that I hear often from conservatives as well. We need to do away with tenure. And as a tenured English professor, I am always quick to respond, look, when you get rid of tenure, it is not going to be the woke English professor doing race, class, and gender that gets the axe. It's going to be me.
Right.
And so now I understand the allure of wanting to get rid of tenure because it makes
Mhm.
some of these sort of main offenders touchable. But it's a question of like who would have that power then to decide who stays and who goes. It would fall to woke administrators. And so
Right.
it would actually end up, in my opinion, purging
Mhm.
whatever
Mhm.
remains of any sort of oppositional culture within the institution. I mean, do you agree with that, or is tenure good, or should we reform it, or what?
So if I were starting from scratch, I would not use tenure in a university because I think that protections for academic freedom should be codified rather than just relying on these people who can't be fired for almost any reasons at all, in order to protect what we really care about, which is, freedom of inquiry. And that's what academic freedom is for. It's not, and that's what tenure is supposed to be for. It's not to protect people who do low academic quality work and phone it in. Um, and so I think tenure is the wrong tool to protect academic freedom. I wouldn't use it if I were starting from scratch. That said, knowing that tenure is in the hands of the same people who want professors fired for having unpopular opinions, uh, I, I don't think abolishing it is going to create the effects that we want to have. I think you would have to independently protect academic freedom first and then do away with tenure. I mean, I do think that 5-year contracts make a lot more sense for universities in general. But where we are now, tenure is still protecting some people who have unpopular opinions. Clearly, it's not protecting everybody. Look at Jonathan Katz, what just happened with him. And so it's not, to someone like you who says, well, tenure is protecting me. Like, for now.
Right. I
Like,
think about that a lot. I mean, it didn't. I mean, it did ultimately. Charles Nagy got his job back, but it
mhm,
didn't stop the university from firing him.
right. Yeah,
And it didn't do it with Katz. I don't think that tenure will protect me.
right. And I mean,
Um,
look at Ilya Shapiro. He's leaving because they've basically told him, like, it's like 2 strikes and you're out. If you ever say anything ever again, you're gone. And so I think that it's not, it's the wrong tool, but it's what we have right now.
I wrote for the Martin Center about my Title IX complaint that was filed against me years back, which was ultimately proven to be fraudulent.
Hmm.
And I asked a new administrator at my university if there was another complaint against me, what role would the original complaint have, even though there was no finding?
Right.
And they told me that the mere existence of the complaint, whether or not there was any finding,
Hmm.
is something that gives credence to the new complaint,
Right.
which is crazy. And so I think that
Well, and
it's
people
just,
know that they can weaponize Title
oh,
IX.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's why I say, like, it's just a question of how bad your university wants to get rid of you. If they want you gone bad enough, they're not going to
Mhm.
let tenure stop them.
Yeah.
Um, so you've already talked about quite a number of solutions that we could do to sort of restore the institution. So I won't
Mhm.
ask you that question again, but I think I'll ask you one that might be harder for you. Um, so let's say 30 years from now, 2052, right? If
Mhm.
all the chips break the way that if all the cards fall the way we would want them to, right?
Mhm.
What would the American university look like at that time? Could you describe it? How would it be different? You know?
Well, I couldn't describe it because there would be such a flowering of different institutions doing different things for different people. in an unbundled way that I would have to describe 50 institutions, 100 models. Some of them would look like the little leafy, cloistered Ivy League quads that are in our movies. And people would go there and they would live the life of the mind and they would study liberal arts and there'd be beautiful paintings. And it would be very the traditional residential undergraduate experience, focused on truth, goodness, and beauty. And some would be, the opposite of that in every way, where it's very, very vocational focused, very career oriented, very flexible, lots of online, lots of technology, and in every imaginable step in between. But I think that and also there would be unknown unknowns. Who knows what could flower if you really had the kind of market innovation that universities right now are. They're really hamstrung by not just the things I've mentioned, accreditation, other federal laws, reporting. There are a lot of reasons that we don't see the innovation that I would love to see. But if we did, I think we would get a huge diversity in the number of institutions, the types of institutions, and the types of things that they offered. And it would be very unlike the education landscape today.
I have a fantasy about running a school out of a strip mall storefront, where a university is run more like a karate dojo than
Mm-hmm.
a behemoth institution,
Right.
and where people would want to come and just hang,
Yeah.
and sort of intellectually work out with the other people in their school, a school in the very traditional sense of the word,
Right.
as a group of people who learn together and share similar beliefs and attitudes, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about accreditation, which to me is a huge factor. I mean, I think that is the one block that keeps the Jenga tower intact, and I think that somehow we need to ensure that students that they can be rewarded for caring less about whether or not accreditation is a thing.
Right.
But until we solve the student loan bit, that can't really happen.
Right.
So I asked you, what would it look like at 30 years? And you painted a very beautiful picture for me. My question is how likely is it that will come to pass in that time?
So we actually are already seeing it for anything that exists for the sake of learning. We have things, there are tons of ways online and in person that you can go learn anything you want to learn. And some of it free, some of it very cheap, some of it, a little bit higher cost. But as long as you're interested in learning just for the sake of learning, it is already out there. And it's beautiful to see. I mean, one example that I think most people will be familiar with is, something like Duolingo. It's got like 50 something languages now. Its basic level is free. And it also has 20 competitors for language learning. So if you want to learn a language just for the sake of learning a language, you can go out there and do it. You can get lifetime memberships in 10 different products and have spent a total of $2,000, and you can learn 50 languages if you want to put the time in. And that's fantastic, but it's totally unaccredited and nobody's going to give you a degree, even if you are able to, to speak the language like a native.
Effectively, you could become a linguist, have that level of knowledge of languages, and have no credential.
Right. And I mean, I'm not gonna say that Duolingo is the same as doing immersion,
right?
Going to Spain for 3 years and learning it there. But you know what? That's also available unaccredited. Just going to Spain, learning Spanish. And so really, anything that you want to learn just for the sake of learning, it's already out there. And some of them are, if you look around, a lot of them are directed to homeschoolers. High school level homeschoolers who are doing college level work. There's a ton of content directed at those people. And it's wonderful. I mean, you can do, the Russian Revolution. You can do a course on, um, I can't even, there are so many things that are
Anything.
flooding into my mind at the same time, and I'm not coming up with any of them. But, any topic under the sun you can find out there from, people with expertise who are willing to teach you. The challenge is, how do you turn that into something with a stamp on it that other people recognize? And that's the challenge that we face. Not is the learning available, because the learning is there. And so some very entrepreneurial folks are trying it in different ways. There are some people down in South Carolina running something called Praxis, which I think is a cool model. They partner their students with businesses, kind of apprentice style, and then they also do a gen ed type program, and students pay for it. They're learning while earning, and it gets paid for that way. There's a new unaccredited university right here in Raleigh, where I am, that's opening its doors this fall, called Bailey's University. And they are going to have, I think, open with 3 or 4 different majors. Their first class of people is going to have like 10 students in it, and start from there. And so I think the question is, can we build a better mousetrap in terms of the credentialing? And people are trying. Microsoft has tried with its kind of, it's Microsoft credentials that you can get, or you can get licensed to do QuickBooks. And so there is some that is directly related to the marketplace, but that challenge is much bigger, I think, than just the availability of the knowledge.
So I guess this is kind of my final question, but I'm going to be 44 in a couple months. So hypothetically, I have 30 years left of work ahead of me. And one of the reasons I started this program is because I wonder sometimes if the university as it exists now, if I have 30 more years in me. And I don't know that I do. But I wonder from your perspective, because you probably have a pretty good view of the university as institution at 35,000 feet.
Mm.
How stable is it structurally? Is the crisis acute enough that within, say, 10 or 15 years, it could sort of collapse of its own weight? Or are the mechanisms of state support and ideological support strong enough to maintain what is a broken system for a long, long time? What do you think about that?
I think that this system can probably be maintained for a long time, but there will be a lot of individual institutions that close, even as the system is maintained. And I think that the main driver of that is just demographics. There are too many universities chasing too few students. And for the most part, the adult students who they hope will fill the ranks of missing 18 to 22-year-olds are disillusioned. They don't believe that going back to college is going to, plug some hole that they missed, the first time when they were 20. And so I think that demographic decline will force some institutions to close, and will force states to do a lot of consolidation, especially states in where they're losing population very quickly, the Northeast, the Midwest. And so we will see a lot of individual institutions go by the wayside, even as we continue kind of propping up this system.
So it sounds like you're saying that R1 can persist for quite some time. The
Yeah,
tier 3, tier 4 universities will probably face large scale closures in the next 20 years.
that is my prediction. But at the same time, I am seeing no, I won't say a large number, but an encouraging number of institutions doing something radically different, which is not taking any federal money, and, and blazing their own trail, or, or following behind Hillsdale's trail, to attract a different kind of student. And so we might, in the midst of all of the, the various destruction, I think we will see some creation going on at the same time. And so it's not, um, an entirely dismal story. And as I said, if you want to learn something, you already can. And so that's the great news.
It's been fantastic talking with you. Jenna Robinson, the president of the James G. Martin Center for Academic Renewal, Raleigh, North Carolina. Make sure to subscribe to their newsletter. Jenna, thank you.
Thanks. It's been great.